A man armed with a shotgun, a handgun, and multiple knives walked into the Washington Hilton, made it down two escalators past multiple security checkpoints, charged through a metal detector, and got close enough to a room containing the President of the United States, the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, the Treasury Secretary, and approximately 2,300 journalists eating spring pea and burrata salad that Secret Service agents had to physically tackle him in the hallway. One Secret Service officer was shot. The bullet hit his vest. He was okay. The entertainer for the evening was a mentalist named Oz Perlman, who, at the moment the shots rang out, was performing a magic trick for Donald Trump on stage. Trump's first instinct upon hearing the gunfire was to wonder if a waiter had dropped a tray. "I was hoping it was a tray," he said later at the White House, but it wasn't. Melania Trump apparently knew immediately. She told her husband, "That's a bad noise." Stan just looked at the screen and said, "Dude, she's literally the most prepared person in that entire room." The question is not whether the Secret Service handled it. They did. The question is how a man with a shotgun got close enough to the ballroom that the President of the United States had to be physically stumbled through a door by his security detail while someone in the crowd tried to start a USA chant. That is the question. And the answer tells you something uncomfortable about the gap between the security theater we perform and the security reality we actually have. Here is what happened in order, starting at the beginning. The White House Correspondents' Dinner is Washington's annual ritual of performed camaraderie between the people in power and the people who are supposed to hold power accountable. They put on tuxedos. They share a room, they eat lobster, someone tells jokes. Everybody pretends this is normal and not deeply weird. This year, the entertainer was Oz Perlman. The venue was the Washington Hilton. The date was Saturday, April 26th. This was Donald Trump's first time attending the dinner as a sitting president. He had boycotted it in his first term. He came back this time, reportedly, because he had things he wanted to say. He said later at the White House that he was really ready to rip it, meaning he had prepared remarks, presumably pointed ones, about the journalists assembled in front of him. The room before the dinner was reportedly buzzing with speculation about which reporters would be targeted and whether Trump would stick around for the Journalism Award presentations, including one honoring Wall Street Journal, reporters who had covered Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. None of that happened. What happened instead? The guests were seated. Dinner service had begun. The spring pea and burrata salad course had been served. Prime Chateaubriand and Maine lobster were being prepared. Oz Perlman was on stage doing a magic trick specifically for the President of the United States. At some point during this trick, shots rang out from the hallway outside the ballroom. The guests closest to the doors heard it first. Security officials shouted, "Shots fired." People dove under tables. Table settings were knocked over. Plates broke. Wine spilled. The commotion moved toward the stage in a wave, according to witnesses, like a physical thing rolling through the room. Vice President J.D. Vance was pulled off the stage first. Trump and Melania were briefly shielded behind armored plating that had been positioned on the stage for exactly this contingency. Then they were removed. Trump stumbled briefly before being assisted through a door to a secure suite behind the stage. One administration official at a media table crawled under it, her high heels visible to anyone still looking. Erica Kirk, widow of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, was seen in tears as she was escorted out. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was extracted from the crowd. So were Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Stephen Miller, and Dan Scavino. Staff outside directed guests toward emergency exits through a warren of hallways. People who made it outside walked blocks through streets blocked by police vehicles while helicopters circled overhead. In the hallway outside the ballroom, where Wolf Blitzer of CNN had gone to use the restroom, Cole Tomas Allen, 31, of Torrance, California, was tackled by Secret Service agents. He had a shotgun, a handgun, and multiple knives. He had charged through a metal detector. He was not killed. He was taken into custody and transported to a hospital for evaluation. The buried detail that most initial coverage glossed past: there was a brief window after the shooter was neutralized where the people running the event considered simply continuing the dinner. Hotel staff began refolding napkins. Water glasses were refilled. Someone adjusted the teleprompter for Trump's remarks. For a moment, the plan was apparently to just resume, to eat the Chateaubriand, to finish the show. Ultimately, they decided not to. Trump deferred to security protocols. The event was canceled and announced for rescheduling within 30 days. But someone had adjusted the teleprompter. Someone had refolded the napkins. Here's what makes this more than a security incident report. Donald Trump has now survived 3 apparent assassination attempts: Butler, Pennsylvania, West Palm Beach, and now a hotel hallway in Northwest Washington, while a mentalist performed card tricks for him at a black tie dinner, 3 times in less than 2 years. By any historical standard, that is a staggering number. By the standards of this particular political moment, it is somehow not the most surprising thing that happened this week. The Washington Hilton is not a random venue. It is the same hotel where John Hinckley Jr. shot Ronald Reagan in 1981 as he was leaving. The hotel is famous for this. The dinner has been held there for decades, specifically because the venue subsequently invested heavily in security infrastructure after the Reagan shooting. The secure suite Trump was taken to after the shots were fired was built for this purpose at this location because of what happened to a president at this location 44 years ago. A man with a shotgun, a handgun, and multiple knives still got to the basement hallway outside the ballroom. He reportedly got there because he was a hotel guest. He had booked a room, which means he went through whatever security screening hotel guests go through rather than the more intensive process applied to dinner attendees. And then, from somewhere inside that hotel, he worked his way down to the level of the ballroom, charged a metal detector, and was tackled approximately 1 hallway away from 2,000 people eating salad and a sitting president watching magic. The DC interim police chief confirmed the shotgun, the handgun, the knives. The AP reported he was believed to be a $25 donor to Kamala Harris's campaign, though no confirmed motive had been established as of the evening's reporting. Trump, asked at the White House press conference whether he believed he was the target, said, "I guess these people are crazy." He did not speculate further. He did not attribute motive. He said the Secret Service acted incredibly, which, by all accounts, they did. Cartman, watching the press conference footage, said simply, "He's surprisingly calm for a guy who's had 3 of these." And he was. Surprisingly calm. Trump stood at the White House podium in his tuxedo and said, "When you're impactful, they go after you. I'm not a basket case." He mentioned he had seen a lot of beautiful dresses and tuxedos tonight. He said they were going to do it again in 30 days. He was measured, almost reflective, in a way that was genuinely hard to square with the fact that a man with a shotgun had just tried to get into the same room as him 45 minutes earlier. The Secret Service, for their part, did what they were there to do. They got the president out, they got the cabinet out, they tackled the shooter before he reached the ballroom. One of their own took a bullet to a vest and kept working. None of that should be minimized. But the question of how this person got that close is not answered by the Secret Service's performance once he was spotted. It is answered by how he got into the hotel in the first place, how he got to the lower level, and what the difference between hotel guest security and dinner attendee security actually amounted to in practice on that particular night. Those are different questions, and they do not yet have public answers. The reaction split along the precise fault lines you would expect and with the precise speed you would expect, which is to say immediately and completely. The corners of the internet that are skeptical of everything this administration does began suggesting within minutes that this was a false flag, that it was staged, that the timing was too convenient. These theories spread faster than any confirmed fact about the evening and will continue to circulate indefinitely regardless of what the investigation finds, because that is how these things work now. The allegation exists, it will not go away. Evidence against it will be reinterpreted as evidence for it. The corners of the internet that are sympathetic to this administration pointed to the reported $25 Harris donation as confirmation of political motivation. This was treated as settled fact before any motive had been established, before the suspect had been formally charged, and before investigators had completed their initial review of his apartment in California. The $25 became a data point that traveled faster than any correction could follow it. Trump's political opponents did not exactly distinguish themselves either. Some suggested, with a speed that bordered on indecent, that this was the consequence of Trump's own rhetoric toward the press, that by repeatedly calling journalists enemies of the people, he had created the conditions for an attack on a room full of journalists. This may or may not be true in some broader sense. As a statement made within an hour of the event, while a Secret Service officer was still being checked for injuries, it was the kind of observation that is less interested in the truth of the situation than in being first to deploy it. The mainstream press, to its credit, was largely measured in its initial coverage. The AP, which had 24 journalists in the room, reported carefully and with appropriate uncertainty. The acknowledgement that motive was unknown was repeated frequently. The facts that were confirmed, the weapons, the suspect's name and age and home state, the officer's condition, the president's safety, were reported as confirmed. The facts that were not confirmed were reported as not confirmed. That restraint lasted approximately 4 hours on social media before being completely buried under takes. Internationally, the story landed with a weight that is hard to convey through American coverage alone. To much of the world, a third apparent assassination attempt on the sitting American president is not a political story, it is a stability story. The question being asked in foreign newsrooms and foreign ministries was not about motive or partisan blame. It was simpler and more alarming. What is happening to that country? That is a different question. It is the kind of question that does not have a reassuring answer. Ordinary people, the ones not professionally invested in the political implications, watched the footage of Secret Service agents tackling a man in a hotel basement and had a very human reaction. Relief that nobody died, followed quickly by the unsettling awareness that the reason nobody died was luck and training and body armor, and that on a slightly different night, with a slightly different set of decisions by any of the people involved, the outcome could have been completely different. That thought sits with you in a way that the political takes do not. Here is what this actually reveals. The White House Correspondents' Dinner exists as a symbol of something that Washington believes about itself, that power and accountability can share a room, that the people in charge and the people whose job it is to challenge them can eat lobster together and still maintain the integrity of both functions. This belief is contested. It has always been contested. Critics from both directions, people who think the press is too cozy with power, people who think the press is adversarial to the point of uselessness, have arguments about whether this dinner should exist at all. None of those arguments were resolved on Saturday night. What Saturday night did was add a layer of literal danger to a gathering that had always been figuratively fraught. And the security question is not a partisan one. It is not a Trump question or a media question. It is a competence question. A man planned this. He booked a hotel room. He brought a shotgun, a handgun, and multiple knives. He worked his way to the basement level of a hotel that has been a known security concern since 1981. He got close enough that the president was physically stumbled out of the room. The gap between what happened and what could have happened is measured in one hallway and one metal detector and the speed of the agents who tackled him. That gap is not acceptable. It does not matter who is president. It does not matter what the shooter's motive turns out to be. The gap is the problem. The broader pattern is this. The security architecture around American political gatherings is extensive and visible and expensive, and still leaves gaps that a motivated individual with a plan and a hotel reservation can exploit. This has been true before Saturday. It will be true after. The question of how to close those gaps is genuinely hard and genuinely important and will receive approximately 3 days of serious public attention before being displaced by whatever comes next. 3 assassination attempts in 2 years. By any historical measure, that is a number that should stop everything and demand sustained, serious, nonpartisan examination of what is happening and why and what it means for the stability of the country. By the standards of the current news cycle, it will be processed, debated, attributed, spun, and archived within the week. That is not a Trump problem. That is not a Democrat problem. That is what happens when the pace of events outruns the capacity of institutions to process them. The event happens. The reactions happen. The takes happen. And then the next thing happens. Here is where we land. A man brought a shotgun to the White House Correspondents' Dinner and got close enough to the ballroom that the president had to be physically assisted through a door while someone in the crowd tried to start a USA chant. And then, for a moment, the people running the dinner considered continuing the dinner. That detail keeps coming back. The napkins being refolded, the teleprompter being adjusted, the institutional reflex to simply proceed, to absorb the chaos and keep the schedule, because the schedule is what everything is organized around, and stopping it feels like admitting something. It was the right call to cancel, but the impulse to continue is revealing. It tells you how these institutions think. It tells you what they prioritize. The show has its own momentum, and that momentum does not stop easily, even when someone fires a gun in the hallway. Trump went back to the White House, stood at a podium in his tuxedo, and said, "I'm not a basket case." He said they'd reschedule in 30 days. He said the Secret Service acted incredibly. Then, he went to bed. The journalists who had been under tables went back to their hotels and filed their stories. The cable networks ran the security footage on a loop. Social media sorted itself into its corners and argued through the night. The shooter sat in custody while investigators drove to his apartment in California. By morning, it was already one of several stories. That is the part that should bother everyone, regardless of politics. Not the attempt itself that is frightening and clarifying and demands serious investigation. The part that should bother everyone is how quickly a third assassination attempt on the sitting president gets metabolized into content. How fast it moves from catastrophe to timeline item. 3 attempts. 1 hallway. 1 vest that stopped a bullet. Next time, the geometry might be different. And Washington will be right back in that room, in its tuxedos, eating the salad, waiting for the main course, because that is what Washington does. The ritual continues. The gap remains. And somebody, somewhere, is already making a reservation.